the show, I am joined by the lovely Sarah Fox. Sarah is a founder of Do Good and Do Well, life and leadership coach, a business mentor, and host of the Do Good and Do Well podcast. So, hello there, Sarah.
Hello, Shelley. How are you?
Well, I've had a bit of a crazy start to the day, if I'm honest, but what happens off air stays off air.
Okay, I'll zip it.
Yeah. I feel we've got a special bond already. Bless you. Now, I love your story. You've been on quite a journey, and I think loads of people are going to relate to this. I know I do. So please share your story of positive changes.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. It's quite hard to know where to start in many ways because I feel like I'm here because of so many things that have happened in my life. I mean, and lots of people say that, but I suppose the thing I really wanted to share this morning was my story around kindness and how I kind of run out of it a little bit. Not a little bit, a lot. So I think it's important to know that I grew up on a really working class estate. So um that's an important part of my story, and I ended up going to a grammar school, which was quite a weird thing for me, going from being surrounded by particular people to suddenly being at a girls' grammar school where everybody sort of seemed much better than me. I had like real comparisonitis. And one of the things I think I started to really do was people please, and I know this now because I've spent a lot of time thinking about my own story. But in order to kind of gain affection, feel like I belonged in a place, I just wanted to please people all the time, and I was, a really kind, generous person. And just I always had volunteered. I volunteered at school. I did a petition at school to try and get girls to wear trousers because they weren't allowed at the time. I was a bit of an activist as well, and um I really, wanted to help people. I was so driven by helping people. I wanted to help the world, and that was partly because I had had so many experiences where I didn't feel like I belonged. So I wanted to help people to feel like they belong and to feel good about themselves. Um, when I left university, I taught performing arts for a while, like at a local college, and then decided, you know what, I need to do something more. I felt like I wanted to make more of a difference, and I ended up working for a housing association as a community artist, really trying to help particularly young people access the arts, because for me the arts had also changed my life, which is another part of my story. And so I did that for a while. I worked in neighborhoods where people had really difficult, challenging lives. I was on the front line, I saw all of that. And then I was made redundant because of 2008, the lovely housing, or not the financial crisis, should I say, and ended up getting this amazing job for a small arts charity called People United. And it's all about how arts and creativity can build kinder and more caring communities. So kindness, as you know, for me, kindness is an active word. It's a doing word, right? We um and so for me, working in this organization, kindness was really at the heart of everything I was doing, and I was learning a lot about kindness, the theory behind it. And it was amazing. It was an amazing job. I loved it so much. I ended up having 2 children as well during that time. This is all in my 30s, and I ended up with a leadership role there. And what happened was, I sort of forgot myself in all of this. And I spent a lot of time being very, very kind to other people. And forgot to be kind to myself. And what I noticed about 10 years into, well, about 9 years into the job, is that I would go to work, I would be so kind to everybody, I would be people pleasing to my heart's content. And there's the helper's high, that you get all the really good hormones when you're helping people. So I had all of that going on as well. But then when I got home, I was absolutely exhausted and I had nothing left for my family, and I certainly had nothing left for me. So I had to make a decision. I loved my job. It was very family orientated. It was on the outside. It was, it looked amazing. And there were so many brilliant things that I was doing. I was working with these incredible artists and working with big arts organizations in the UK. But I just, it wasn't working for my life anymore. And I, had to do something about it. So I wrote a long list of why I should stay and why I should go. And I had nothing to go to. This is quite a difficult decision for me because I didn't have another job. I just knew that I needed to do something different. I needed to come out of that sector for a little bit. I needed to find myself really, and who I was, not who I was in that organization and that job. And and so I did this list, spoke to some people about it, really close friends and family, and made the decision to leave that organization. And it was so hard. And then I spent a lot of time growing vegetables, not always very well. But just outside and being with my children and doing exercise and just taking care of myself, really. And it was that space that then enabled me to think about other opportunities. And so I trained to be a coach and a mentor, and here I am now. So yeah, that's quite long-winded, but it for me, I needed to step away from that job despite it being really good.
Yeah, and I love that because I resigned from the most gorgeous job this year because my health deteriorated, and I cried as I resigned. And my boss was like, "Shelley, I don't think I want your notice," but you have to sometimes, don't you? And for me, it was because of my health. I had like very little energy, and I wanted to give that to my family, which took so long to create. But I just love how the why list, like, why should I stay? Why should I go? Because people just sit there and you get overwhelmed, you get burnout because you're just thinking the logical ego is, I love this job, I love this income.
Yeah.
But that is an amazing, small but mighty positive change when you sit there and write the why list, like, why should I stay? Why should I go? That's really, it's a simple task, but I should imagine it was really insightful for you.
There's something always for me about getting out of my head and writing things down. I am a bit of a list maker, which isn't always great with my long to-do list, but I don't do that as much. But yeah, and I've just remembered that it didn't give me the final answer. It didn't, because actually there was just as much on the why to stay and why to go, and it was all quite balanced. But a question that I asked myself once I had got all of that out of my head was, who needs me most at the moment? And the answer was my family and me.
Yeah.
And I think when you're so I work a lot with change makers, people who want to make a real difference, a positive contribution in the world. And especially when you're working on the front line and you're seeing other people who don't have as much or have very tricky, challenging lives, it's hard to say no to that.
Yeah.
It's hard to go, what, I can't do that anymore. And for me, that question of who needs me, who needs my time and resources was so powerful. And it was also that recognition that it doesn't mean that I'm never going to go back to that again, although actually now I don't think I would. But at the time I thought, nothing is forever, is it? You can make a decision and still you can change your mind.
Yeah.
And that's okay. um so yeah, it was that list making, and it was asking the right questions.
Does that help you now with your coaching? Because coaching is a lot about asking the right questions. Maybe is that what inspired you to go that way?
Yeah, well, I had been coached a little bit. My line manager had left the organization and become a coach, and he had his leadership style had a very a coachy approach anyway. So I knew the power of, really being listened to, and for people to ask that right question, and getting really curious about ourselves. And what I realized is that I'd been working with that coaching approach. I just didn't have the accreditation, and I was really interested in that, really interested in people's stories. I love people. I've been so lucky, fortunate to have met a whole range of people from a whole range of backgrounds. And so for me, to be able to support them so that, to hold that space for them. I call it a safe space, but also a brave space to get curious about yourself. So I think, yeah, for me, having been through that process and looking back, I realized I was in a bit of burnout, but I didn't realize it at the time. Looking back, I realized that, I had lots of limiting beliefs about myself that had come from childhood and other parts of my life. And so that got me really curious, and I thought, yeah, this is a great job. I want to give people those skills so that they can make better decisions for themselves, rather than feeling like they're penned in and can't change.
Yeah. I was going to take you back because you mentioned about your childhood and even when you started
Mm.
like the grammar school, it was very much into people pleasing. Are you still a people pleaser or is there a miraculous cure?
I think I'm a recovering people pleaser. I notice it. I mean, I still do it, yeah. But I notice it. I pick it up, and I can reframe it a bit and think about, Sarah, why are you doing this? Is it because you're in your people pleaser mode, or are you in your wise Jedi Zen like mode? And I have to kind of shift sometimes. Um, but I think when you are a people pleaser, and you will just give and you give and you give, and I was really depleted from all of that giving. Yet I was, I'd give a little bit more, and I see that in so many people now. And that's why I set up Do Good and Do Well, because I wanted to say to people, th- you know this is a thing that exists because we are human beings. And I think so many people think, oh, it's me, this is just me. I'm like this. And I want to go, no, there's so many people, especially change makers, who want to make a difference in the world. You want to do that because of something that's often happened that you've experienced. You've experienced injustice, unhappiness, you know, yeah, and I think also the people pleasing, my dad modeled that massively. He was a huge people pleaser. And so yeah, I think there is something about how your parents behave as well, and therefore how you end up being in the world.
Yeah. I loved how you said like you had the why list, like why stay, why go, and things like that. And then you just suddenly leapt to the point that you started growing vegetables. How did that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, so my husband and I had fertility issues that there I will get to that the growing bit. So we had fertility issues and ended up having IVF, and in my first round of IVF, it failed, and it was springtime. And I remember so clearly sitting in the garden, and I think I'd grown some tomatoes, and they were the seedlings were coming up. And I remember thinking, "Oh, okay, I can't grow a baby, but I can grow a tomato. There was, there was just so much, there was a lot of pain at that point, and the gardening, the growing was quite healing for me. And so when I left that job, which was it was a big part of my identity. I was the second member of staff in that organization. And so I helped to grow it. And it felt like a child in many ways for me. So it was a painful separation. And so going to the allotment, I got an allotment, and digging and being grounded and part of that cycle again, I just found it really healing. My allotment currently wouldn't tell you that, because it's looking a bit of a state because I haven't been there for a while, but it was a really important part of the process of me getting out of the house and being able to grow something and be part of the planet, really.
I think that's blooming beautiful. I was just curious, but then the most stunning story came out. I love how that grew personally, Sarah. That's absolutely beautiful. And I totally get the whole growth thing, because as people know by now that my husband and I had a huge infertility journey, and people from the outside looking in don't believe it because we've got 4 children, but it's horrific. But actually what worked for us was the visualization of, like, a seed and a growing. And I won't go in depth on the case people having their breakfast, but we have to visualize certain things happening within the body.
Yeah.
Sitting there with your tomato seeds and seeing them grow and know you can nurture these things. Actually, I'd say if you are struggling with infertility or growing a new business idea, then absolutely get outside, get grounding, get down to earth, grow tomatoes.
Yeah. It's so powerful. And actually, one of the things I haven't mentioned is that so the year that I decided to leave, I was just about to turn 40, and my dad had passed away as well, a couple of years before that, and I had had a miscarriage. So and just to add to the trauma, my nan passed away 3 weeks after my dad. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. So so I think for me there was this real, I watched my dad pass away. I was there when he took his last breath, and there is something so life-changing. Your landscape massively changes when you see that happen. And so for me, I had all of this playing on in the background about, the meaning of life, and how my dad was only 62 when he passed away on his birthday. And it was all this, like, life is short. It's a cliche, but it's so true. And I wanted to get a bit of control back. My dad had spent so long kind of wanting, he was a disabled man, and he had cerebral palsy, and he had so many regrets that he hadn't traveled enough, he hadn't done this enough, he hadn't done that enough. And so that, for me, had really got into my subconscious and my conscious, saying, you need to take control. You need to take control and make a change, because you're not happy despite this amazing organization, and my team were just, I love them, I truly love them, and the work was amazing. It wasn't enough, and I needed to change. So yeah, I think, again, that growing, that seeing life, it's really powerful.
Bless you. You had so much loss in such a short space of time. And I get the laughter. I do. I run a Good Grief Northampton Death Cafe here in the Midlands area of the UK. And people say, like, why would you do that? It must be miserable. But there's so much laughter there, because it's such a fine line, isn't it, between sort of sadness and joy, and sort of like fear and anger. There's always this fine line. And you'd be laughing one minute and crying the next. So I totally get why you're laughing at your dad's death, love. It's all right.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because when so he was in Poole Hospital and the staff there were amazing. It was over Christmas. He died on Boxing Day. So it was I don't know what you call it, like a skeleton staff kind of,
Yeah.
And he had a big family, or he has a big family. So there were 6 of them, and he's a twin as well. So we had this lovely room, and it looked out over Poole Bay. And there was like a little area outside where we would drink tea, and then we'd go in, and there were these moments where it was like, okay, he's going to go now. So we'd all sort of go into this room, and we'd all be surrounding him and sort of going, it's okay, you can go. And then he sort of, I mean, he wasn't conscious, but then he'd sort of come back, as it were, and then we'd all trundle back out and have cups of tea and be laughing and sharing stories. And then the brilliant nurses would be like, no, I think it's, and then so we'd all trundle back into the room again, and it went on like that for 3 days. And and it was Christmas, and I had very small children at the time, and it was hard, but I can see the kind of hilarity in it as well, and my dad would have done the same.
Yeah, no, I love that. In my next book, Good Grief, the ACED Approach of Modern Day Grief Healing, I talk about the timing of death, because I see, because my background is like nursing, worked at end of life. And I saw it time and time again that if I happened to meet sort of the family years later, they'd still be struck by the grief and the death, and they hadn't moved on. Because but they died when I wasn't there. I couldn't get there in time. I was on a school run, and they carry that for the rest of their life, which is no quality of life at all. So it's really important to me to write about the timing of death and what I observed in 30 years in healthcare. And I've seen people fly from the other side of the world, and that parent will hold on. They have they say got 3 hours, they're going to pass anything, and they'll hold on for 3 days until the family come from Germany. But more often than not, I've seen people, when the evil nurse, sends them that good old cup of English tea, that they die there. And people go, oh, he went for a cup of tea and they died. And I was only couldn't find a parking space and they died. But in my book, I just write that it's just meant to be. They don't want you to have the last memory of that, that chain stoking, that stopping, starting like yourself, going in and out for 3 days, like the hokey cokey. Do you know what I mean? They love you to their very last breath, and you don't always have to be there to witness it.
I think that's so. I've got goosebumps talking. I've had loads of goosebumps this week, but because we lost my mother-in-law recently, and that's exactly what happened. That my husband and his siblings were there, and they went out to get a cup of tea, and the nurse came in to change my mother-in-law, and then she passed away at that moment. And my best friend, that happened to her mum. And I hear a lot of those stories, and we have to process it, don't we? Whatever happens to us in those experiences, grief is a funny thing, and it takes, a friend of mine described it to me that you sort of feel like you're not over it, but you're okay, and then suddenly someone will come with a big hammer and like whack you over the head suddenly, and you'll be like, oh no, there it is, it's still there. But we need to be better at talking about this stuff, and I love the fact that you're writing that book. It's so important, because I think people do feel guilty if they're not there holding hand. And I think it's that we often I call it like the advert head, when you kind of aspire to have an experience which might look like an advert. And I think there is people have this feeling of, I want to sit there and say goodbye to them and watch them go. And having done that, it's not necessarily it's not pleasant, obviously, but there are lots of different experiences, as you say, and as you're writing about.
Yeah, I like to think that we're never alone at the end of our days. I mean, the book, which is out in September, talks about that, like, because that's probably why I left nursing, Sarah. It's very similar to you. Like, I was given so much and it was end of life or chemotherapy to life-changing diagnosis. And I loved it, really loved it. But then I went home and thought, I do love my family, but I just want to go to bed now, and it is that running out of kindness, that burnout sort of thing. But I've taken from it also, one of the things that changed me in my nursing career was, as I'd gone through my own losses of like death of loved ones and my own infertility and miscarriages and things, I come to see we're more than the physical body. So then I was this kind of kooky nurse who would be with the dying, but then I'd feel changes of the energy and temperature in the room. And I'd see the body changing, but not in a sort of like medical way as such. You know what I mean? Like more colours and temperatures and visions and things like that. So it's probably why I left. And that's what the book, I hope, helps people, because we just see what we want to see, what our ego says we need to see. So we need to be in that room or they are dead. That's the end of their story. But it's not. I believe that life carries on for us, life carries on for them, but in a very different address. Things do go on, and people do get stuck in grief, which is why I do the Death Cafe. And I love what you said about the hammer whacking. I call it the grief tsunami, that we try, and go on with the flow of life. And sometimes we get these waves coming in, like, on the death anniversaries, or that certain smell, which would take you back to your memory, and things like that. And just when you think I've nailed this grief journey, you get that tsunami coming, thinking you're so crap at this, girl, and that curveball comes in. But I think it just reminds us you're human and you've dared to love at some point. I don't think it's a bad thing.
I love that. I do. And I think that dared to love, it's so, grief, it's love, isn't it? Grief is love.
Yeah.
And we're all going to experience it.
Yeah, it is the only certainty in life, and people hate that, don't they?
Yes. Yeah.
Bless you. People are probably sitting there thinking they're going to cry because we've gone from tomatoes into death and grief.
And then there's a lot of life in that.
Bless you. So we were saying about your career and how, like, who needs me most at the moment, and you create these positive changes with the why list and the me time. So for people listening, whether it's they need to change, make a positive change because of, maybe it is because of grief, maybe it is because they're burnt out at work, what one positive change would you say they need to make today?
So the thing that I think has struck me most, both in my own experiences and observing, getting curious with other people about their experiences, is that we are mostly terrible at talking to ourselves in a kind, compassionate way. And if I believe that if we can't do that to ourselves, we can't really truly do that for other people either. It's not and so I would say practice self-compassion, practice self-kindness, practice a positive self-talk, and every day, even if that's a gratitude journal or you write down 3 things you love about yourself, work towards looking in the mirror to say I love you. That really makes people cringe when I suggest I suggest that. But I think until we really love ourselves and think that we're worthy of loving ourselves, then I think it's much harder to make those changes.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've said probably on most of my podcast episodes, if I'm honest, Sarah, like the relationship we have with ourselves is the most important one of all. We're going back to the same topic because I say this is my whole sentence and it's going to go back into the whole grief thing. But my whole saying is the relationship you have with yourself is the most important one of all, because it's the only one from your first breath to your last. See, I like end of life. I do. It makes me realize how I want to live the first part of my life. But it is true that if we're always looking for happiness or answers externally, like, if I do that job, marry that man, please that person, it's not gonna be for you. That is one of the life lessons I learned from the dying. It's like, live your life, not someone else's version of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so challenging, isn't it, when we are given all these messages constantly about how we should be living our lives. We should be doing this. If I was going to say one more thing, that like, really notice when you're shoulding yourself. I should be doing this. Oh, I'm 30. I should be married by now. I should have children. I should, all of that stuff. I've been working for 25 years. I should be a leader. It's like, and that's the self-talk to go, actually, what is it you want? What do you want in life? And it's okay for you to say that. You are allowed to have wants and desires. But I think you can only really know that when you start to have that relationship with yourself that's a more positive one, and not a critical beat yourself up one.
Yeah, I love that, because you do say should quite a lot. Like I said, like, I should have 6 figures, really. I'm 47. I should do this because, I used to have this career. But when you ask me about what wants and desires are, it is kind of, well, writing books, going for walks, podcasting. And it is, again, life lessons from the dying. The simple things in life, the little things in life at the end of your life are actually the big things that mattered all along.
Yeah.
More goosebumps. Bless you. Sarah Fox, I've absolutely loved learning your story. I just think you're one amazing woman, and everyone should listen to this episode. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed talking. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
And don't forget, what happened off air stays off air. Thank you so much again, Sarah Fox.
Thanks, Shelley.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you subscribe and leave a positive review. If you would like to create your own positive changes, you can buy Positive Changes, a self-kick book from all online book retailers or from ShelleyFKnight.com. If you need a dollop of positivity until the next episode, come like and follow us over on Facebook at Shelley F. Knight, Life Goes On. As always, I've been Shelley F. Knight, and you've been amazing.